Welcome to my channel. Story 1. The Last Guest in Room 217. I used to work night shifts at a small, rundown hotel just off a highway in upstate New York. It was the type of place where the vacancy smelled stale, like old urine and regret. The carpets were stained and most of the artwork was missing from the walls. Over the years, the place had become a haven for drifters and truckers passing through. Weekdays were slow, so it wasn't uncommon to go an entire shift without seeing a single guest. One night, around 11:30 p.m., a man came in. He looked middle-aged, pale, with tired eyes. He asked for a room on the top floor, any room, so I gave him room 217. Nothing unusual about the request or the man. He paid in cash, gave me his driver's license. Everything matched. He signed the guest log and headed up to his room. That was the last time I saw him. For the next 2 hours, everything was fine. Then around 3 a.m., I started hearing strange static from the monitor that showed the hallway cameras. At first it was faint, but it was definitely coming from the camera outside room 217. It kept glitching, cutting to black and then flickering like someone was standing too close. I tried to focus on other things, tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't stop. I called the room. No answer. I hit the phone again. Still nothing. So I got up, grabbed the heavy silver chain that hung beside the desk, which was supposed to ward off robbers, and headed upstairs. As I walked past room 217, the light from the hallway showed a dark outline on the door. I stopped and knocked. Silence. I knocked again, louder this time, and waited. Still nothing. Confused and a little scared, I used the master key to enter. The room was empty. The bed was untouched. There was no luggage anywhere. The window was locked from the inside. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint glow of the city lights from the street below. The man had climbed out. But why? What had he been hiding from? I searched the room quickly, found nothing. And then I went back down to check the guest log again. This is where it gets weird. There was no record of the man checking in. There was no credit card imprint. There was no signature on the cash receipt. It was like he'd never been there. I rewound the footage from the front desk security camera and watched it frame by frame. The man never appeared. But the room key for 217 was missing from the drawer where I'd placed it. I told the morning crew what happened, but they just laughed and said it was a waste of time to worry about it. Apparently it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was that man? Where did he go? Why was he whispering? Over the next few weeks, we tried renting out room 217 several times, but it was a nightmare. Every night, the same thing happened. A new guest would arrive, settle in around midnight, and then in the early hours of the morning. They would wake up to the sound of a man standing at the foot of their bed. They described him as middle-aged, pale, with tired eyes. He would be standing there whispering, and then he would vanish. We posted new rules. No alcohol, no smoking. We removed the carpet and repainted the walls. Even changed the room number to 218, hoping it would help. But the whispers continued. To this day, room 217 remains vacant. Some say if you listen closely, you can still hear him at night. Some say they've seen his ghost wandering the halls. Some say they've felt his icy fingers brush against their neck. That was story 1. And if you want to hear more scary stories, stay tuned for more content. Welcome back, campers. It's time for another spooky story. This one comes from my cousin Sam and I. It was the summer after our freshman year of college, and we were looking for jobs. Sam found one as a fire lookout in a remote part of Montana. Fire lookouts are people who watch for forest fires. Back then, it was considered a seasonal job, seasonal being the operative word. The pay wasn't great, but it came with room and board, and a really cool fire watch tower about 50 feet up in the sky. The tower was made of wood and had a 360-degree view of miles and miles of dense forest in all directions. When you're up that high, you feel like you can see forever. Most nights were peaceful. We'd sit on the top floor and watch the stars come out, while listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Sometimes we'd hear the distant crackle of lightning followed by the smell of rain on hot rocks. But most nights were quiet, too quiet. That's why when I tell you that one night around 1 a.m., I woke up to Sam shaking me. I was not expecting it to be anything more than a branch or a squirrel. "There's someone down there," he whispered, his voice shaky. We looked out the tower window and far below us in the clearing. We could make out 3 figures. They were just standing still, not moving, facing the tower. It was weird because they weren't doing anything. There were no flashlights. They hadn't built a campfire. They weren't making any noise. They were just standing there in the dark like statues. Sam and I looked at each other, unsure of what to do. We radioed base, but there was no response. The forest had been quiet for so long that any little noise had become startling. The only sound now was the wind, which seemed to whisper through the trees, "Get out." One of the figures shifted and did something. Sam and I leaned closer to the window, straining to see what it was. It was one of the figures holding something up in the air. It looked like a small, slender object that glinted in the moonlight. They were reflecting moonlight back up at us. Sam whispered, "They're signaling." I didn't want to believe it. But the idea of spending the night in that tower with whoever or whatever was down there was too much for me. In the morning after, of course, agreeing to stay up all night and watch, we climbed down the tower and went to the spot where the figures had been standing. There were no footprints. There was no sign that anyone had been there. The only evidence of their visit was a strange shard of broken mirror nailed to a nearby tree. Scratched into the bark below it were the words, "We see you too." After that, we never spent a night in the tower again. Thanks for listening, campers. If you enjoyed this spooky tale, be sure to stay tuned for more campfire stories. And until then, happy haunting. Back in 2015, I was working late at a university library. I was in the stacks finishing a project for finals. It was almost midnight, and the place was nearly empty. As I packed up my laptop, I noticed someone sitting alone in the reading corner. I didn't pay much attention at first. I figured it was just some grad student doing research. But when I glanced back, he was staring straight at me. He was middle-aged, pale skin, kind of lanky, and dressed in a long coat, even though it was hot outside. He sat there for a few minutes just watching me. Then he waved slowly. I waved back awkwardly. Then he spoke. His voice was raspy, and it echoed weirdly in the silent library. "Good night, my full name?" I froze. That was weird. I'd never seen this man before in my life. "Do I know you?" I asked. He smiled and replied, "Not yet, but we've met before." I laughed nervously. Maybe it was some kind of prank or a social experiment. Those were popular at the time. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. "You wore a red shirt the day your dog died." My chest tightened. That was true. I had worn red that day. It was the day I buried Sparky. I was 11. No one else knew that. Not even my family. Stood up abruptly and walked straight to the front desk. The librarian stood up, confused. "Everything okay?" she asked. "There's a man in the reading area," I said. "He's kind of creepy. Just go check." She looked toward the section. "'Kay," she said slowly. "I don't see anyone." I walked over myself. Nothing. There was no exit nearby. There were no windows. And besides, he was sitting right by a bookshelf. There was no way he could have slipped out without me seeing him. Then I noticed something on the desk where he'd been sitting. There was a page torn from a psychology textbook. It was circled in red ink. I picked it up. It was about déjà vu and time loops in human perception. To this day, I have no explanation. How did this guy know what hadn't happened yet? How did he know about Sparky? I finished my work at home that night. Couldn't focus on my studies anyway. Kept replaying the incident over and over in my head, trying to come up with logical explanations. None made sense. Was it déjà vu? Was it a coincidence? Was it fate? Or was it something more sinister? Sometimes I still wonder if he's out there, if he's watching me, waiting for our paths to cross again. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy these sorts of spooky stories, stay tuned for more. Also, be sure to check out the series where I explore terrifying events in and around our very own city. Now let's move on to story 4. But use headphones because this one hurts.